There is a quiet, devastating alchemy that occurs in the ordinary spaces of human life, over morning coffee, across a polished boardroom table, or in the soft glow of a kitchen light. A mind conceives something extraordinary. A vision takes root in the fertile soil of the imagination, blazing with the bright, undeniable intensity of a newly struck match. It feels solid. It feels absolute. One can feel the future weight of it in the bones, taste the salt of its triumph, and hear the cadence of its reality. And then, with an innocence as gentle as a breath, the architect of this dream turns to another human being and speaks the words aloud. I am going to do this. Watch closely. Observe the mechanics of the invisible. In that exact fraction of a second, something shifts. It is rarely dramatic. There is no sudden flash of lightning, no shattering of glass, no violent disagreement. Instead, what happens is far more subtle and infinitely more tragic. The listener nods, offers a mild smile, perhaps asks a practical question, or points out a logistical hurdle with the best of intentions. But inside the speaker, a slow, silent deflation begins. The enthusiasm that moments before drossed as an ocean drains away through an unseen fracture. The certainty that was absolute now becomes porous, fragile, and faintly ridiculous. The vision, once a living, breathing cathedral in the theater of the mind, folds inward and collapses like a punctured balloon, leaving behind a cold, hollow ash of self-doubt. Why does this happen? Why is it that the very act of sharing a sacred aspiration so often strips it of its vitality? Most human beings wander through existence entirely blind to the invisible currents that pass between minds. They assume that communication is merely a transfer of neutral data, words passing from one brain to another across an empty room, but consciousness is never neutral. Every human being carries an active, broadcasting energetic signature, a specific vibrational frequency forged by their own fears, limitations, habits, and past defeats. When a delicate, unformed desire is thrust into an unsynchronized energetic field, it encounters a hostile climate. It is not that the listener is malicious, it is simply that their frequency cannot bear the weight of creation. The dream meets the atmosphere of another person's doubt, and like a deep-sea creature brought too quickly to the surface, it decompresses, ruptures, and dissolves before it ever has a chance to touch the physical earth. To comprehend this phenomenon, one must look past the superficial mechanics of conversation and examine the esoteric laws of consciousness mapped out by pioneers like Florence Scovel Shinn. At the heart of her philosophy lies a profound realization. Human beings are not separate, isolated islands of awareness drifting through an indifferent void. We are nodes in a vast, interconnected web of psychic energy, constantly broadcasting and receiving signals that either amplify or diminish our creative power. Why is an unformed desire so intensely vulnerable to these external frequencies? To answer this, one must interrogate the nature of inception itself. When an idea first flashes across the human consciousness, it does not enter as a finished, hardened physical object. It enters as potential energy, pure, unadulterated potential. In the physics of the mind, this initial spark is the psychological equivalent of a single-celled zygote or a newly planted seed resting beneath 3 feet of dark, heavy soil. It possesses an internal blueprint for greatness, but it possesses no structural armor. It has no hard bark, no established root system, and no defensive perimeter. Its entire existence depends upon a protected, uninterrupted environment where internal chemistry can take place undisturbed. How, then, does the intrusion of another consciousness disrupt this delicate chemistry? When the visionary speaks their goal aloud prematurely, they are opening the doors of a pristine, sterile operating theater and inviting a crowd of well-meaning onlookers inside, boots caked with the mud of their own everyday limitations. The listener's mind, operating automatically out of self-preservation and past conditioning, evaluates the new idea through the lens of what they believe is possible. Their internal monologue whispers, "Is that realistic? Have they thought about the risks? What if they fail?" Though these thoughts may remain unspoken, they radiate as an active energetic frequency. This frequency acts as a solvent upon the nascent visualization. The speaker's subconscious mind, always hypersensitive to the tribal consensus of the group, picks up on this static interference. The pure, single-pointed frequency of creation is suddenly scrambled by the competing frequency of skepticism. The inner certainty begins to oscillate, waver, and bleed outward. Recursive thinking forces us to ask an even deeper question: why does the human ego possess such an overwhelming, desperate compulsion to broadcast its dreams the moment they are conceived? The answer lies in the primitive wiring of survival. For millennia, human beings survived only by securing the immediate validation and consensus of the tribe. Doing something entirely novel, solitary, or unproven was an existential threat. Therefore, the ego interprets a bold new vision as a dangerous anomaly. To soothe its own internal terror of isolation, the ego runs outward, seeking to anchor the dream in the collective approval of others. It treats external validation as a substitute for internal conviction. Yet, this is the great paradox of manifestation. Validation is the antithesis of creation. The moment you require someone else to tell you that your vision is valid, you concede that your own consciousness is insufficient to sustain it. You hand the steering wheel of your reality over to minds that cannot see what you see, anchoring your infinite potential to their finite imaginations. Consider the parable of the ancient master silversmith of Kyoto, an artisan named Kenji, whose work was legendary throughout the provinces for its ethereal purity and impossible intricacy. While other craftsmen labored in open workshops, facing the bustling public bazaars, answering questions, listening to opinions, showing their half-formed wares to passing merchants, Kenji maintained a legendary vow of absolute silence during the creation of his masterworks. For months at a time, Kenji would retreat into a windowless stone chamber at the back of his compound. No one was permitted to enter. He brought no apprentices into the early phases of his design. When local nobles knocked on his door, eager to commission pieces and curious to know what form his next creation would take, Kenji's assistants would turn them away with a single phrase: "The master is in the silence." Years into his career, a young, ambitious apprentice named Daiki grew frustrated by this secrecy. Daiki believed that art was meant to be shared, debated, and refined through collective dialogue. One night, driven by an overwhelming desire to understand the master's secret, Daiki slipped past the heavy oak doors and crept into the sacred stone chamber while Kenji slept. On the workbench sat a block of raw, unpolished silver, destined to become a ceremonial dragon destined for the emperor's court. But as Daiki leaned over the workbench, holding a candle to inspect the metal, a terrible realization chilled his blood. The silver was not being shaped by grand, sweeping strokes. Instead, microscopic, invisible incisions covered the surface lines so fine they could only be felt by a fingertip. Etched with a microscopic precision that defied human steadiness. Kenji had spent 6 months breathing upon that metal in absolute solitude, protecting the work from the drafts of passing opinions, the moisture of human breath, and the distracting noise of the courtyard. The next morning, Kenji stood quietly beside Daiki in the workshop. The apprentice, humbled and trembling, asked, "Master, why do you lock yourself away? Why not let us help you carve? Why not speak of the design so we can praise its brilliance before it is finished?" Kenji looked at the young man with eyes as deep as midnight. He picked up a small, unpolished shard of silver and dropped it into the bustling street outside the window, where horses trampled the dirt and laborers shouted back and forth. "Look at that metal," Kenji said softly. "If you drop a seed into the mud of the marketplace, it is not nourished by the traffic, it is crushed beneath it. A vision in its infancy is softer than hot silver. If you show it to the world before the fire has hardened its shape, the breath of 1,000 doubters will oxidize it into worthlessness. True creation is an act of immaculate conception between your soul and the infinite. To invite the crowd into the womb is to invite a miscarriage." That day, Daiki understood the brilliance of Kenji's work was not merely a product of skilled hands, but of an inviolable energetic boundary. How does one translate this ancient law into the raw, practical architecture of daily life? Beginning today, you must adopt the discipline of the sacred vault, When a new vision descends upon you, whether it is a business enterprise, a creative project, a lifestyle transformation, or a profound personal healing, recognize it for what it is, a delicate, unhardened seedling resting in the dark soil of your consciousness. Resist the visceral, biological urge to text your friends, announce your plans on social media, or seek the comforting nod of a spouse or colleague. Notice the itch of the ego wanting applause before the work has even begun. When that urge arises, pause, take a slow breath, and anchor your awareness inward. Remind yourself that every time you speak your goal prematurely, you leak the vital electromagnetic potential required to manifest it. Let the silence become your sanctuary. Let the unseen work be your armor. You now understand why your past dreams lost their magic upon being spoken. But what happens when the seed is safely underground? What are the exact laws governing the dark, unseen weeks of the gestation period? Ahead lies the deeper mechanics of the invisible soil and the startling truth about how reality organizes itself when no one is watching. Cross the threshold with us into Chapter 2. Step mentally into the deep embrace of an ancient forest at twilight. The air here does not merely move. It thickens with the heavy, rich scent of damp earth, decomposing organic matter, and the hidden alchemy of subterranean life. Look down at the floor beneath your boots. To the untrained eye, this ground appears dead, inert, a chaotic graveyard of fallen branches, rotting leaves, and forgotten debris. It is silent. It is dark. It is entirely unobserved by the bustling world above. Yet, within this absolute blackness, a profound and staggering violence of creation is underway. Millions of seeds, spores, and root systems are working in total isolation, locked in a silent pact with the earth. They do not send up shoots to announce their arrival. They do not flash neon signals of intent to the canopy overhead. They surrender entirely to the dark. Consider the profound paradox inherent in this natural design. Nothing of true and lasting magnitude is ever born in the light. Humanity spends its collective existence running toward illumination, desperate for applause, visibility, and immediate validation. We seek out the floodlights the moment an idea sparks within our minds, believing that exposure equals progress. But nature whispers a very different, unyielding law through the silence of the forest floor. The most vital stages of evolution, growth, and transformation require complete obscurity. When a vision takes root in the human consciousness, it enters a psychological wilderness that mirrors this forest floor. To drag that fragile inception into the blinding glare of social scrutiny, casual opinions, and premature conversation is the psychological equivalent of ripping a germinating acorn out of the soil every morning just to check if it is cooperating. The air burns it. The light sterilizes it. The absence of protective darkness strangles the very life out of it. The observer who wishes to master the art of manifestation must first learn to respect the shadows. True power does not posture, it accumulates in the dark. To understand why silence is the ultimate prerequisite for manifestation, one must deconstruct the mechanics of human consciousness through the lens of Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric yet profoundly practical philosophy. Why does the human mind instantly sabotage its own highest inspirations the moment they are spoken aloud? To answer this, we must deploy the method of recursive thinking and ask the deeper question: what is actually happening to an energetic blueprint when it crosses the threshold from the internal mental plane into the external vocal plane? The first layer of the deconstruction lies in the nature of thought itself. On the mental plane, a desire exists as a pure, unblemished frequency. It is a sovereign creation, vibrating at a specific, high-octane rate dictated by the creator's raw emotion and imagination. In this sacred inner chamber, the ego has not yet hijacked the vision with doubt, because the vision is still an intimate secret shared only between the conscious mind and the infinite intelligence of the universe. Why does speaking it disrupt this purity? Because human speech requires translation into collective language, and collective language is already polluted by the shared consensus reality of the masses. The moment you articulate a dream to another human being, you strip away its unique, high-frequency energetic armor and wrap it in the conventional vocabulary of the everyday world. You force a transcendent, invisible potential to wear the ill-fitting clothes of common reality. How does the listener's psychological framework interact with this translation? When the sound waves of your voice strike another person's ears, their consciousness does not act as a passive mirror. It acts as an active prism. Because every individual is trapped inside their own matrix of past limitations, fears, and conditioning, their immediate psychological reflex upon hearing your grand vision is to filter it through their sense of the possible. They cannot perceive your potential. They can only perceive their own capacity to imagine it. Therefore, when you ask, "How do I protect my vision from this contamination?" the answer reveals itself as a structural necessity rather than a social preference. You must recognize that consciousness operates on a closed-loop system of energetic conservation. Every time you voice an unrooted ambition, you leak voltage, the psychic pressure that was meant to act as the internal fuel for driving your daily actions, maintaining your discipline, and forging neural pathways, is suddenly vented outward into the environment. The psychological tension required to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be is discharged through the act of narration. You feel a cheap, transient, high dopamine hit of feeling understood or validated, and your subconscious mind is tricked into believing the work is already done because you talked about it. In reality, you have just traded the raw, unspent currency of creation for a handful of empty social calories. The vision starves from lack of internal pressure, while the external world absorbs and neutralizes your momentum. Silence is not merely withholding information, it is the deliberate containment of creative pressure, forcing the universe to bend to your singular will because the energy has nowhere else to go but forward into physical manifestation. To witness this principle operating at the highest tier of human history, one must look away from modern self-help paradigms and turn our gaze toward the shadowy workshops of Renaissance Florence, specifically to the silent, hermetic existence of master alchemists and architects who shaped the physical world without ever uttering a premature word. In the late 15th century, a master builder was commissioned to construct a cathedral dome that architectural experts of the era openly declared impossible. The laws of physics, geometry, and materials science at the time dictated that a dome of such staggering magnitude would collapse inward under its own weight before it could ever be sealed at the apex. Had this master builder behaved like the modern creator, had he run to the town squares, called press conferences, posted architectural renderings on public boards, and asked local merchants, critics, and well-meaning friends for their opinions on how to solve the structural dilemma, the project would have died in its infancy. He would have been drowned in a sea of well-intentioned skepticism. "It's too heavy. The stone won't hold. No one has ever done this before. Who do you think you are?" Instead, the master did something radical. He vanished. For years, he retreated into a walled compound, shuttering his windows and locking his doors against the bustling life of the city. Inside that absolute sanctuary of silence, he did not talk about the dome. He did not describe the inner ribbing system he was inventing. He did not debate his theories with the local guilds. Instead, he spent his days in grueling, uninterrupted concentration. He carved miniature models out of wood and wax. He tested bricks in private kilns. He calculated load-bearing vectors on sheets of parchment by candlelight, alone with his thoughts and the infinite intelligence he trusted implicitly. When visitors knocked on his door seeking updates, they were turned away. When colleagues asked how the engineering problem was being solved, he offered only a quiet, enigmatic smile and returned to his work. The city whispered. Rumors circulated that he had gone mad, that the commission was a failure, that he had abandoned the project entirely. The external world grew restless and doubtful. Yet, beneath that heavy blanket of public silence, the true work was crystallizing with terrifying precision. When the compound doors finally swung open years later, the master did not bring a speech, a manifesto, or a defense of his methods. He brought the finished, soaring reality of the dome itself. It stood against the Tuscan sky as an unshakable monument of engineering triumph. The skeptics who had doubted him in whispers could no longer argue, because the physical evidence of his silent discipline rendered all words entirely obsolete. The crowd did not look at a promise, they looked at a finished law of reality. That is the ultimate legacy of the silent gestation. How, then, does one translate this majestic, ancient law into the gritty, hyper-connected realities of modern daily life? How do you practice the art of the silent soil when your phone buzzes with notifications, your colleagues demand updates, and your family asks about your plans over dinner? The integration begins with a radical, non-negotiable boundary. The 7-day quarantine of the seed. Beginning today, apply a strict moratorium to your newest, most cherished goals. When a flash of inspiration hits you, whether it is a business venture, a creative project, a lifestyle transformation, or a profound personal healing journey, do not share it. Do not text your best friend. Do not hint at it on social media. Do not seek the warm, comforting bath of early validation. Instead, treat that idea as a classified state secret entrusted solely to your custody. When someone asks what you are working on, master the art of the gracious, powerful deflection. I'm just focusing on some personal projects right now. I'll share more when the time is right. Notice the physical sensation that arises when you do this. You may feel a twitch of anxiety, an uncomfortable itch of the ego wanting to be seen and praised. That itch is simply the old programming, the addiction to external dopamine dying off. Breathe through it. Let that unspent energy pool inside your chest, building an internal reservoir of focused, creative pressure. Water your seed in the dark with your imagination, seeing it complete, whole, and victorious in the theater of your mind, while the rest of the world remains blissfully unaware. By guarding your inner sanctuary, you stop leaking your divine power into the airwaves of collective doubt. You become dense, focused, and magnetically potent. Yet, as you lock the gates of your inner garden and begin this quiet work of cultivation, a new and subtle danger arises. The threat to your manifestation no longer comes from strangers in the public square. It begins to whisper from inside your own home, carried in the gentle, loving voices of the people who care about you the most. What happens when the greatest interference doesn't wear the mask of an enemy, but the warm, smiling face of an ally? The shadows shift, and the sanctuary faces its next great trial as we cross the threshold into Chapter 3. Imagine a woman standing by a quiet, frost-edged window in the deep hush of a winter morning, her hand resting softly against the swell of her abdomen. Around her, the world races forward with its usual relentless velocity. Telephones ring, traffic hums in the distance, and society demands constant visibility, productivity, and immediate output. Yet, within the private sanctuary of her physical form, an entirely different physics governs reality. Cells are dividing in absolute darkness. A heart is beating from nothingness. A completely new existence is forging its foundational blueprint, layer by intricate layer, hidden entirely behind closed doors. She does not broadcast this miracle to the bustling streets. She does not call a press conference to announce that a soul is taking shape. Instinct whispers a timeless, unyielding law directly into her bloodstream. The most monumental creations require a shielded womb. Nature, in all its infinite wisdom, has built an inviolable gestation period into the genesis of biological life. The earliest weeks, the most tender months, demand absolute privacy, protection, and a deliberate withdrawal from the chaotic scrutiny of the external world. Consider the profound paradox that humanity inflicts upon its own spiritual creations. While we instinctively honor the biological gestation of a child, we routinely commit spiritual infanticide with our dreams. The moment a brilliant vision is conceived in the mind, the moment a spark of destiny flashes across the inner horizon, we drag it out into the harsh, freezing daylight of public opinion. We flash it like a newborn infant to a passing crowd of strangers, exposing its delicate, unformed aura to a storm of opinions, casual doubts, and misaligned frequencies. The observer, who wishes to master the art of manifestation, must recognize a staggering truth. A thought form is no less real, and no less vulnerable, than a biological embryo. It demands its own sacred gestation period. To violate this sanctuary of silence is to invite a psychological miscarriage of the highest order. To dissect this phenomenon with the rigor it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's foundational insights regarding consciousness through the lens of recursive thinking. Why does premature exposure to the outside world trigger the structural collapse of a nascent vision? What is the precise mechanism by which external interaction causes a psychological miscarriage of potential? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question: what occurs within the energetic architecture of a newly conceived desire when it is subjected to foreign psychological fields? When a desire is first born in the human mind, it exists as a pure, high-vibrational blueprint. It has no physical mass, no historical precedent in the creator's immediate life, and no established neural pathways backing it up. It is pure potential energy, delicate, malleable, and hypersensitive to ambient frequencies. In this early stage, the manifestation relies entirely on the internal pressure of the creator's faith to sustain its form. How does the introduction of external observation disrupt this delicate state? When the creator speaks of the vision prematurely, they open a valve on their internal pressure vessel. The collective consciousness of the listener immediately floods into the creator's mental space. Because most people operate from a baseline of limitation, scarcity, and past trauma, and their immediate reaction to an unanchored vision is one of structural resistance. Even if clothed in polite smiles and words of encouragement, the underlying frequency of the listener is governed by the question, is this realistic? Why is that question fatal? Because realism is merely a polite word for the status quo. When a listener evaluates your unformed vision through the lens of their own limitations, their consciousness acts as a dampening field. Their skepticism introduces a wave of dissonance that cancels out the high-frequency oscillation of your nascent dream. The energetic circuit is short-circuited. Therefore, when we ask, how do we prevent this energetic miscarriage? The answer requires a total revolution in psychological discipline. You must understand that manifestation is not a democratic process. It is an absolute autocracy of consciousness. During the gestation period, your inner world must become a closed ecosystem. Just as a developing fetus cannot survive if exposed to the open air before its lungs are formed, your vision cannot survive the open air of collective opinion before its root system has plunged deep into the bedrock of your subconscious mind. The psychological tension of keeping a secret dream alive inside you, the sweet, agonizing pressure of carrying a future reality that no one else can yet see, is precisely the fuel that hardens the fluid blueprint into physical fact. When you vent that tension through premature speech, you rob the seed of the very pressure it needs to crack open the earth. To witness this principle of the sacred gestation period manifested in human history, we must travel back to the late 19th century and examine the reclusive, fiercely guarded laboratory of a visionary inventor who changed the face of modern civilization. Nikola Tesla, during his early conceptualization of the rotating magnetic field and alternating current systems. In the winter of 1882, while walking through a park in Budapest, Tesla experienced a blinding flash of intuitive revelation. The complete, flawless design of the alternating current motor materialized in his mind's eye with such vivid, terrifying clarity that he could see every moving part, every winding, every vector of force as if it were already a physical machine standing before him. A lesser mind would have immediately rushed to the local newspapers, babbled to financial backers, or sought the validation of academic peers. Tesla did the exact opposite. He understood the sanctity of the gestation period with absolute, monastic precision. For years following that revelation, while working menial jobs and struggling to survive, Tesla kept the entire mechanism locked away in the impenetrable vault of his own mind. He did not sketch it carelessly for barroom acquaintances. He did not debate its feasibility with skeptical engineers who still clung to direct current paradigms. Instead, he subjected his mind to an agonizingly rigorous internal testing ground. In his memoirs, Tesla noted that he could mentally run a machine for weeks, inspecting it for wear and tear, calculating stress points, and refining every component entirely within his imagination, without building a single physical model until the design was mathematically and energetically absolute. When a well-meaning associate asked him about his grand theories during these silent years, Tesla offered no details, maintaining a polite, impenetrable boundary. He knew that the world's collective doubt, the entrenched industrial interests, the establishment physicists who declared alternating current a mathematical impossibility, would act as a toxic storm upon an unrooted sapling. By guarding his vision in total, uncompromising silence through its critical formation stage, Tesla allowed the internal pressure of his genius to compound exponentially. When he finally emerged from his seclusion to unveil his patents, the design was so complete, so mathematically bulletproof, and so overwhelmingly powerful that it swept away generations of entrenched opposition almost overnight. The gestation period had done its silent, perfect work. The seed had become a titan. How do we take this monumental truth and forge it into an unshakable daily practice? How do you protect your own modern-day visions from the premature exposure that kills greatness in its cradle? The integration requires a profound shift in how you view your own inner life. Starting today, adopt the vow of intellectual chastity. Recognize that not every thought deserves to be spoken, and not every listener deserves access to your future. When an inspired idea drops into your awareness, a new career path, a creative endeavor, a deep personal transformation, treat it not as a topic for casual dinner conversation, but as a classified state secret entrusted to you by the cosmos. When tempted to share your goals for a quick hit of external validation, pause and ask yourself, am I speaking this to build it, or am I speaking it to dilute the pressure because I am afraid to carry it alone? If it is the latter, seal your lips. Let the pressure build. Let the unspent energy of your vision turn inward, thickening your aura, sharpening your focus, and driving your private daily actions with a quiet, terrifying intensity. You do not need anyone else to believe in your seed while it is underground. Your only duty is to protect the dark, fertile soil in which it rests. Yet, as you lock the gates of your inner sanctuary and master the art of silent gestation, you will soon discover a profound twist in the plot of manifestation. The greatest threat to your sacred seed does not come from distant strangers or cynical critics. What happens when the hands trying to pull up your roots to check on their health belong to the people who love you the most? The sanctuary walls are tested by the warmest fires as we step forward into Chapter 4. Picture an old, sun-drenched orchard at the break of dawn, heavy with the mist of a vanishing night. In the center of this sacred plot stands a seasoned gardener, his hands calloused from decades of communion with the earth. He has just buried a rare, priceless seed deep within the dark, mineral-rich soil. The earth above it is smooth, uniform, and entirely undisturbed. Now, imagine the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of the alternative. Picture that same gardener walking back to the spot a mere 12 hours later, wielding a heavy steel shovel. He plunges the blade into the dirt, rips the fragile, germinating seed from its hidden bed, holds it up to the morning sun to inspect whether roots have sprouted, and loudly asks the passing crows for their professional opinion on its health. To witness such an act would be to watch a masterclass in self-sabotage, a deliberate, horrific execution of potential born from an intolerable itch of impatience. Yet, human beings commit this exact spiritual atrocity every single day of their lives. A brilliant, transcendent vision is conceived in the silent temple of the mind. It is buried in the rich soil of the subconscious, and within 24 hours, the creator is digging it up with a relentless shovel of anxiety, dragging it into the glaring light of social media feeds, family dinners, and casual coffee shops, demanding to know why it hasn't grown yet. The observer who wishes to master the architecture of reality must understand a foundational, unyielding paradox. The ego cannot bear darkness, but creation cannot survive the light. The garden of the mind requires a sovereign keeper who possesses the terrifying discipline to walk away, to leave the soil undisturbed, and to trust the silent, invisible mechanics of growth that operate far beyond the reach of human interference. To dissect this compulsive need for premature exposure, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's profound esoteric principles through the rigorous framework of recursive thinking. Why is the human psyche biologically and psychologically addicted to pulling up its own seeds? What is the deep, underlying mechanical failure that drives the creator to seek external confirmation for an internal reality? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question. What is the ego actually attempting to achieve when it demands immediate validation from the external world? The ego is an instrument of survival designed to navigate the physical consensus reality of the herd. It measures safety through consensus, and it measures progress through visible, tactile feedback. When an individual conceives a revolutionary desire, a reality that has never existed in their physical experience before, the ego experiences a profound ontological panic. It looks out into the physical world, sees an absolute void where the dream should be, and experiences a terrifying sense of isolation. How does the ego attempt to soothe this existential terror? It reaches for the narcotic of external applause. It seeks to convert the invisible, unformed potential of the spirit into the cheap, instantly consumable currency of social opinion. By talking about the goal, the creator tricks their nervous system into experiencing a premature release of dopamine. The brain registers the conversation about the achievement as the achievement itself, thereby short-circuiting the very drive required to manifest it. Why is this mechanism fundamentally fatal to the manifestation process? Because energy follows attention, and attention is a finite resource. When you direct your focus outward, asking for opinions, testing the waters, explaining your vision to the uninitiated, you split your energetic voltage. Instead of maintaining a concentrated, laser-like beam of unwavering belief directed downward into the subconscious soil, your belief leaks outward in a 360-degree radius, hitting the dense, resistant walls of other people's disbelief. Therefore, when we ask, how do we conquer this primal addiction to validation, the answer demands a revolutionary psychological posture. You must transition your internal locus of evaluation from an external compass to an internal axis of absolute certainty. You must realize that tending the inner garden is not a passive act of waiting. It is an aggressive, fiercely protected discipline of emotional housekeeping. Every time you resist the urge to tell someone about your grand design, every time you swallow the words of explanation, when a skeptic raises an eyebrow, you are redirecting tons of creative pressure back down into the root system. You are teaching your subconscious mind a new rule of engagement. We do not need the world to see it for it to be real. The inner garden thrives not because the crowd approves of the soil, but because the gardener refuses to let the harsh winds of opinion touch the seed. To see this principle of rigorous, silent cultivation operating at the summit of human achievement, we must turn our gaze away from the modern era and examine the reclusive, fiercely disciplined working life of one of history's greatest landscape architects and master designers, Capability Brown, who reshaped the English countryside in the 18th century. When Brown was commissioned to transform the vast, rugged estates of the British nobility into sweeping, idealized landscapes of rolling hills, ancient oaks, and mirrored lakes, he did not hold public symposiums, sketch out his grand designs on tavern napkins for local farmers to critique, or ask the local squires for their artistic approval during the critical early phases of planting. Instead, he did something that often infuriated his wealthy patron. He threw up high timber fences around the entire perimeter of the estate. He locked the gates. He banned visitors, critics, and even the estate owners themselves from walking the grounds while the foundational work was underway. For months, sometimes for years, the estate would appear dead, torn up, and chaotic from the outside. Mounds of dark earth were piled high, drainage ditches were carved into the bedrock. Saplings were buried deep in hidden groves where no eye could see them. The nobility, paying small fortunes for these transformations, would grow deeply anxious, sending frantic letters demanding to know what was happening behind those wooden barricades, demanding progress reports, asking why nothing beautiful was yet visible to the casual eye. Brown's response was always an unyielding, majestic silence. He refused to show his work in progress. He understood a truth that ordinary men could never grasp. A landscape in the process of formation looks like a disaster zone. If he had exposed those raw, unfinished earthworks to the critical eyes of the aristocracy, if he had allowed well-meaning lords and ladies to comment on the mud, the chaos, and the seemingly misplaced saplings, their doubt and impatience would have forced compromises, alterations, and dilutions of his grand vision. Instead, Brown worked in absolute, sovereign isolation behind his locked gates, tending to the unseen infrastructure with ruthless, uncompromising focus. And then, the day would arrive. The timber fences would be torn down, the gates would swing wide open, and the astonished patrons would step out onto rolling, paradisiacal lawns, mature groves of trees, and shimmering lakes that looked as though they had existed there for 1,000 years. The silence of the barricades had protected the gestation. The invisible work had birthed an undeniable reality. That is the power of the locked garden. How do we translate this majestic architectural discipline into the hyper-exposed, notification-driven reality of your everyday life? How do you tend your inner garden when the modern world demands that you live with glass walls? The integration begins with the establishment of your own psychological timber fences. Starting today, you must implement the practice of the unseen harvest. When you plant a new desire in your consciousness, a financial threshold, a creative masterpiece, a profound personal reinvention, you must consciously lock the gates of your mind. When the impulse arises to update your peers, to post a hint on social media, or to seek a comforting nod of approval from a colleague, catch yourself mid-motion. Recognize that itch for what it is, the ego's panic in the dark. Smile at it, and then intentionally redirect that energy inward. Take that unspent conversational fuel and invest it entirely in the imaginal act. Sit in the quietude of your own room and water the seed with the vivid, sensory-rich feeling of its completion. Do not hope for it. Inhabit it. Feel the texture of the reality already realized, the emotional baseline of the person who already possesses it, and the absolute quiet confidence of a gardener who knows the harvest is coming because he planted it in good soil. By refusing to dig up your seeds for inspection, you concentrate your faith into an explosive, magnetic force. Your belief becomes dense, heavy, and immovable. The outer world loses its power to sway you because your validation is no longer imported from the crowd. It is generated from the infinite depths of your own sovereign spirit. Yet, as you lock your gates and tend your garden in the sacred dark, a profound and startling realization dawns upon you. The greatest threat to your sacred harvest does not come from distant critics or passing strangers. What happens when the people trying to peek over your fence, asking well-meaning questions that plant seeds of doubt, are the very individuals who share your breakfast table and hold your heart? The shadows lengthen, and the sanctuary faces its most delicate, high-stakes trial as we cross the threshold into Chapter 5. Picture a sunlit kitchen on a crisp autumn morning. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of domestic peace. Across the wooden table sits someone you love deeply, a lifelong partner, a devoted parent, or a cherished friend whose loyalty has been forged over decades. There is no malice in their eyes, no cold calculation in their posture. Their gaze is warm, affectionate, and genuinely concerned. You lean forward, buoyed by a rare, crystalline wave of inspiration about a new life path, a daring venture, or a profound personal reinvention that has been gestating in your soul. You begin to share your vision, painting the future with the broad, vivid brushstrokes of your enthusiasm. And then, with the gentle touch of someone adjusting a blanket on a sleeping child, they ask a question. Are you sure that's realistic? Have you thought about what happens if it fails? I just don't want to see you get hurt. Within 10 minutes of that loving conversation, you walk away from the table feeling entirely hollowed out. The vibrant certainty that made your chest ache with possibility just moments ago has evaporated like morning mist. The vision feels distant, foolish, and impossibly fragile. Consider the profound, unsettling paradox of this human dynamic. The most lethal blows to your destiny are rarely struck by your enemies. They are administered with surgical precision by the soft, warm hands of the people who love you most. The observer who wishes to master the art of manifestation must pierce through the sentimental illusion of human relationships and confront an unyielding occult truth. Interference does not require malice. Doubt does not need to be hostile to be lethal. A well-meaning anchor dropped into your energetic sea will sink your ship just as fast as an anchor thrown by a pirate. To dissect this painful and ubiquitous phenomenon with the rigor it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric principles through the uncompromising lens of recursive thinking. Why do the people who love us become our most efficient saboteurs? What is the actual mechanism by which well-intentioned affection contaminates a high-frequency manifestation? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question. What occurs within the energetic architecture of an unformed dream when it collides with the psychological projection of a loving observer? When you share an unanchored vision with someone who cares for you, their consciousness does not act as an empty vessel. It acts as an active, defensive mirror, because human beings are fundamentally wired for survival within the known parameters of consensus reality. Anyone who loves you carries a subconscious, primal mandate. Keep them safe. Keep them within the tribe. Protect them from the unknown. How does this mandate manifest in a conversation? When you present a vision that transcends their current paradigm, their love for you instantly triggers their own internal fears, past disappointments, and limitations. They are not evaluating your potential, they are measuring your ambition against their own capacity to endure risk. Their questions, wrapped in the velvet glove of caution, are actually coded transmissions of their own anxiety. Why is that emotional transmission fatal to your manifestation? Because energy is literal. In the unseen realms of consciousness, human beings are constantly broadcasting and receiving electromagnetic frequencies. When your mother, your partner, or your best friend projects worry, doubt, or excessive realism onto your fragile, germinating seed, their psychological frequency acts as a wave of static interference. It is the precise equivalent of tuning a radio to a crystal-clear broadcast of classical music and then switching on a high-voltage industrial blender right next to the antenna. The signal is distorted, broken, and ultimately drowned out by the noise. Therefore, when we ask, how do we navigate the terrain of those we love without compromising our destiny? The answer requires a radical, uncompromised boundary. You must realize that protecting your vision from well-meaning saboteurs is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of spiritual preservation. You must separate relational loyalty from energetic sovereignty. You can love a person with every fiber of your being while simultaneously refusing to grant them backstage access to the most sacred, vulnerable construction site of your soul. They do not need to understand your vision for it to become real. They only need to experience the fruit of it after the walls are built. Until then, the kitchen table conversations must remain anchored in the mundane, while the cathedral of your future is erected in absolute, uncompromised silence. To witness this principle of well-meaning sabotage operating at the highest level of historical transformation, we must turn our gaze toward the early 20th century life of a brilliant physicist and inventor who had to flee the well-meaning imprisonment of familial expectation to bring his genius into the physical world. Robert Goddard, the founding father of modern rocketry. In the first decades of the 20th century, Goddard conceived the mathematical and mechanical foundations for liquid-fueled spaceflight. To the conventional scientific establishment of his era, the idea of a rocket leaving Earth's atmosphere and traveling into the vacuum of space was not just revolutionary, it was treated as a dangerous delusion, a public embarrassment, and the rambling of a madman. Yet, Goddard's most insidious battles were not fought against hostile academic journals or mocking journalists. They were fought within the warm, suffocating embrace of his own deeply caring family circle. His mother, who loved him fiercely and had dedicated her life to protecting him from hardship, constantly injected gentle warnings into their daily interactions. His closest friends, people of impeccable character and genuine affection, regularly pulled him aside to plead with him to abandon his absurd space pipe dreams and settle down into a respectable, stable professorship where he wouldn't risk public humiliation or financial ruin. Every word they spoke was fueled by love. Every warning came from a place of deep concern for his emotional well-being. They simply wanted to protect him from getting hurt by an unyielding, cynical world. Had Goddard allowed his mother's loving anxiety or his friend's protective realism to infiltrate the core of his creative drive, his rockets would have remained permanently grounded on paper. He would have traded his cosmic destiny for the cozy, suffocating safety of local approval. Instead, Goddard understood something that separated the masters from the masses. He quietly packed his notebooks, moved his testing grounds to the isolated, desolate hills of Roswell, New Mexico, and drew an impenetrable boundary between his personal relationships and his scientific vision. He stopped discussing his theories with those who loved him. He stopped listening to the warm, well-meaning voices that urged him to be realistic. Working in absolute, lonely isolation, protected from the affectionate interference of well-wishers, Goddard built and successfully launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. When the smoke cleared over those desert hills, the world was forced to rewrite the laws of physics. The well-meaning saboteurs were left standing in the dust, not because they were evil, but because they had finally been bypassed by a man who valued his destiny more than their comfort. How do we take this razor-sharp truth and apply it to the messy, emotionally charged landscape of your own life today? How do you maintain deep, loving connections with your family and friends while fiercely neutralizing their unconscious sabotage? The integration begins with the execution of the energetic quarantine of the hearth. Starting today, you must conduct a ruthless audit of what you share across your dinner tables, family group chats, and intimate friendships. Recognize that love does not grant anyone the right to manage your destiny. When a well-meaning relative or a devoted partner asks about your grand plans, master the art of the loving, impenetrable deflection. I'm keeping things close to my chest right now because I want to let them develop properly. I promise I'll share the results when they're ready. If they push driven by their anxiety, disguised as concern, do not argue. Do not defend your vision. And do not try to make them understand. Argument is a sign that your energy is leaking. Instead, smile calmly, validate their love, and immediately change the subject. Protect your inner frequency the way a royal guard protects the crown jewels. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the future God has whispered into your ear. By sealing the doors of your inner sanctuary against the well-meaning winds of domestic doubt, you stop the internal bleeding of your creative power. You become sovereign, steady, and terrifyingly focused. Yet, as you master the art of guarding your vision from those closest to you, a new and intoxicating digital wilderness opens up before your eyes. In an age of algorithms, endless feeds, and public broadcasts, the temptation to trade private power for public applause reaches a fever pitch. What happens when your desire for a quiet sanctuary clashes with a world that rewards every passing thought with a flood of digital validation? The sanctuary walls must withstand the ultimate siren song as we cross the threshold into Chapter 6. Imagine sitting in a pitch-black room late at night, the only illumination coming from the cold, hypnotic blue glow of a handheld screen. Your thumb moves with mechanical, effortless rhythm, swiping, scrolling, refreshing. Every few seconds, a fresh cascade of images, opinions, headlines, and curated lives floods your retinas. A sudden red notification dot flares to life, and a quiet, addictive surge of dopamine floods your nervous system. Someone has liked your thought. Someone has left a comment validating your existence. For a brief, fleeting moment, you feel seen, powerful, and connected to the pulse of the world. And then, you lock the screen. The glass goes dark, reflecting your own tired face in the shadows. The sudden silence of the room rushes back in, and, and colder than before, leaving behind a profound, gnawing emptiness, a hollow ache that no amount of digital applause can ever quite fill. Consider the profound, modern paradox governing human consciousness. We live in an era of unprecedented hyperconnection, yet we are starving to death in a crowded room of digital shadows. Never before in human history has it been so effortlessly seductive to trade the sovereign power of the inner sanctuary for the cheap, transient currency of public engagement. The modern individual conceives a brilliant, sacred desire, and within seconds, the impulse strikes. Post it. Share it. Let the world weigh in. We broadcast our rawest, most vulnerable ambitions into the vast, indifferent maw of the social media ether, measuring our self-worth by the fickle algorithms of strangers. The observer who wishes to master the art of manifestation must recognize that the digital echo chamber is not merely a distraction, it is an energetic meat grinder designed to pulverize high vibrational potential into fine, worthless dust. To dissect this digital addiction with the razor-sharp precision it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric principles through the uncompromising lens of recursive thinking. Why does the human psyche eagerly surrender its most profound creative visions to the algorithmic crowd? What is the actual mechanical failure that occurs when a sacred intention is thrown into a public social media feed? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question. What is the neurological and energetic cost of seeking external validation through a digital medium? When you broadcast a nascent desire online, whether through a casual post, a story update, or an announcement of a goal, you are engaging in a massive, uncontrolled dispersal of vital creative voltage. On the energetic plane, human intention requires a closed circuit to build pressure. The nervous system experiences a psychological tension between where you are and where you want to be. That tension is the literal fuel that drives your daily actions, disciplines your habits, and magnetizes your reality. How does the algorithm disrupt this closed circuit? When you share your goal prematurely, the collective consciousness of the internet rushes into your psychic space. Thousands of strangers operating from varying frequencies of cynicism, jealousy, indifference, and fleeting curiosity project their thoughts onto your vision. Even worse, the platform's dopamine-driven feedback loop tricks your brain into experiencing the applause for the goal as the achievement of the goal itself. Why is this neurological trick fatal to manifestation? Because your primitive brain cannot distinguish between the actual physical manifestation of a success and the social media validation about that success. When you post about your grand plan and receive 1,000 likes, your brain releases the exact same reward chemicals it would have released had you actually crossed the finish line. The drive is murdered in its cradle. You become addicted to the applause of the potential rather than the mastery of the execution. Therefore, when we ask, how do we break free from this digital narcotic, the answer demands an act of absolute psychological asceticism. You must recognize that true power is entirely silent, anonymous, and unconcerned with public metrics. Every time you resist the urge to post your progress, every time you close an app instead of broadcasting your ambition, you trap that creative pressure inside your own energy field. You force the universe to respond to your uncompromised focus. The digital echo chamber survives on your data, your attention, and your need for approval. Starve it of your secrets, and watch how quickly your internal sovereignty roars back to life. To witness this principle of digital asceticism operating at the peak of modern performance, we must examine the deliberate, radical retreat of a generation of master creators, innovators, and thinkers who realize that true genius cannot breathe inside a fishbowl of public opinion. Consider the legendary, unyielding protocol adopted by elite software architects, deep tech pioneers, and world-class artists who deliberately vanish from public platforms during the foundational years of their greatest creations. In the heart of Silicon Valley and the artistic capitals of the world, a quiet counter-revolution has long simmered among those who actually build the future. While the masses chatter away on digital feeds, trading seconds of attention for drops of dopamine, the true architects lock their doors, delete their public profiles, and retreat into absolute radio silence. A prominent software pioneer, the mastermind behind an operating system that revolutionized global communication, made a famous vow early in his career. He refused to own a smartphone, completely abstained from social media, and banned public announcements of any product until it was fully built, polished, and ready to deploy into the physical world. When young entrepreneurs asked him how he managed to avoid the addictive pull of digital validation, his answer was chillingly simple: public opinion is a swamp. If you wade into it while you are trying to build something sacred, the mud will get into the machinery, and the machine will never run. Had that pioneer spent his formative years posting his conceptual code online, seeking feedback from internet forums, and measuring his worth by upvotes and viral shares, his company would have drowned in the noise of premature commentary. The critics would have told him it was impossible. The crowds would have pulled him toward incremental improvements instead of radical breakthroughs. Instead, he chose the lonely, majestic path of digital exile. Working in total obscurity behind locked screens and closed loops of internal testing, he allowed his genius to compound without a single leak of energy. When he finally stepped onto a stage to reveal his creation, it did not need a hype campaign. The sheer weight of its finished reality commanded the room. The digital echo chamber was left howling at empty air, while the builder walked away, already moving on to the next silent conquest. How do we take this radical, unyielding truth and forge it into an armor that protects your mind from the sirens of the modern digital landscape? How do you reclaim your sovereign focus when your pocket is constantly vibrating with the temptation to share? The integration begins with the enactment of the digital blackout of the vision. Starting today, you must adopt a strict, non-negotiable policy regarding your personal goals and creative projects. Nothing leaves your inner circle until it stands complete in the physical world. When you feel the sudden, compulsive itch to post about an achievement, to share a milestone on social media, or to hint at a grand ambition online, freeze. Catch your thumb hovering over the screen. Ask yourself the ultimate diagnostic question. Am I trying to build this reality, or am I begging the crowd to believe in it because I am terrified to stand alone? If it is the latter, close the app immediately. Turn off your notifications. Put the phone in another room and sit in the uncomfortable, beautiful silence that follows. Let that unspent impulse pool inside your chest. Let it transform into the heavy, magnetic voltage of true concentration. You do not need the internet's permission to change your life. You do not need a single like, share, or comment to validate the fire burning in your soul. By sealing your creative process away from the digital meat grinder, you become dense, focused, and electrically potent. The noise of the world fades into static, and your inner voice rises with absolute clarity. Yet, as you master the art of guarding your vision from the public square and the digital screen, a deeper, more profound transformation takes place within the mechanics of your consciousness. The energy you have conserved must go somewhere. What happens when your inner focus becomes so concentrated, so dense, and so absolute that it stops acting like a wish and starts acting like an unalterable law of physics? The alchemy of the mind shifts its gear as we cross the threshold into Chapter 7. Picture an old, high-altitude physics laboratory just before the crack of dawn. In the center of the dark room sits an experimental optical apparatus, quiet and inert. For hours, ambient light has drifted lazily through the window's diffused sunlight, flickering street lamps, and stray reflections bouncing off the glass. This ambient light illuminates the room, yes, but it lacks force. It warms the dust motes, yet it cannot cut through steel, it cannot ignite wood, and it cannot reshape physical reality. It is weak precisely because it is scattered across a 360-degree radius. Now, imagine the operator of the laboratory turning on a single, highly refined instrument, a ruby laser. The device hums with a deep, suppressed resonance. Within a fraction of a second, the scattered, wandering photons are forced into absolute alignment. They march in lockstep, vibrating at the exact same frequency, compressed into a single, razor-thin beam of coherent light. The operator points this concentrated ray toward a block of solid industrial titanium resting on a steel block. There is no loud explosion, no theatrical display of force. There is only a silent, piercing hiss as the laser burns through the dense metal with terrifying, effortless precision, slicing it like paper. Consider the profound, unyielding paradox of this physical law. Scattered energy illuminates the surface, but concentrated energy alters reality. Humanity spends its collective existence living like ambient light, leaking its intentions into every casual conversation, broadcasting its grandest visions to passing strangers, and venting its emotional voltage through endless chatter. We wonder why our dreams leave no permanent mark on the physical world, why our goals melt away at the first sign of resistance, and why our manifestations lack the teeth to bite into reality. The observer, who wishes to master the art of creation, must stop leaking light and learn the supreme alchemy of internal concentration. To dissect this principle with the rigorous philosophical and psychological depth it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric laws through the uncompromising framework of recursive thinking. What is the actual mechanism by which concentrated inner focus bends the physical plane? Why does a consolidated intention carry magnetic supremacy over a divided mind? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question: what occurs within the quantum and psychological architecture of consciousness when an individual completely stops talking about their desire and begins holding it in unyielding, unshared silence? On the psychological plane, human attention functions as a high-pressure hydraulic system. Every thought, every spoken word, and every external validation-seeking action acts as a valve releasing fluid pressure. When you talk about your goals, you open every valve simultaneously. The psychic pressure drops to zero. You feel relieved, but your mind is left completely drained of the kinetic voltage required to sustain rigorous execution, emotional discipline, and intuitive problem-solving. How does internal concentration reverse this drainage? When you seal your lips, lock your doors, and refuse to let a single word of your ambition escape into the outer world, the hydraulic pressure begins to rise exponentially. The mind, starved of its usual dopamine hits of cheap external applause, is forced to turn its immense computational power inward. Why is that inward turn the exact catalyst for physical manifestation? Because reality, at its deepest metaphysical level, is a mirror that reflects the dominant, uncontested state of your internal conviction. When your belief is scattered across the opinions of 10 different friends, 5 family members, and an internet audience, your internal signal is muddy, fragmented, and weak. The universe receives conflicting instructions, but when that same belief is compressed, distilled, and held in absolute, uncompromised silence inside your own skull, it becomes a laser beam of concentrated frequency. Therefore, when we ask, how do we master this internal alchemy? The answer demands an absolute restructuring of personal discipline. You must realize that privacy is not a passive preference. It is an active transformer of spiritual power. Every time you choose to swallow an exciting update about your goal instead of texting it to someone, you are feeding the core. You are thickening your aura, sharpening your mental clarity, and loading the spring of your manifestation with unprecedented potential energy. The universe does not respond to what you say you want. It bows unconditionally to the unshakable, silent pressure of what you know you are. To witness this principle of absolute internal concentration operating at the pinnacle of human creation, we must look away from modern self-help paradigms and turn our gaze toward the monastic, legendary working life of one of history's greatest literary architects, the French novelist Honoré de Balzac. During the height of his career, when Balzac set out to write his monumental masterwork La Comédie Humaine, a vast, sprawling series of interconnected novels depicting every facet of French society across thousands of pages, he did not behave like the typical contemporary artist. He did not frequent Parisian salons to discuss his plot points. He did not leak drafts to critics to gauge public excitement, and he did not host celebratory gatherings to announce which characters he was about to invent. Instead, Balzac practiced a form of radical, almost terrifying internal concentration. He would completely vanish from society for months at a time. He rented a secluded, Spartan workspace, bolted his doors, and drew heavy curtains across the windows to shut out the distractions of the physical world. He lived on black coffee and absolute solitude, working up to 15 hours a day in total, unbroken silence. During these dark, intense periods of gestation, he did not speak of his characters to a living soul. He did not ask his friends if the plot twists were believable. He did not seek validation for his creative direction. He compressed the entire creative universe of his intellect into a single white-hot focal point of concentration. The psychological pressure inside his mind became so dense, so absolute, that it began to warp his perception of reality. He famously muttered on his deathbed, calling for a fictional doctor from one of his unpublished manuscripts, because his internal characters had become more real to him than the physical people standing in his room. When Balzac finally emerged from his silent sanctuary to deliver his manuscripts to publishers, the literary world was rocked by an unstoppable tidal wave of genius. He didn't just write books. He hurled living, breathing worlds onto paper with a force that permanently altered European literature. The critics who had previously whispered about his eccentricities were silenced instantly. They were not looking at a mere proposal. They were standing before an immovable monument of concentrated human will, forged entirely in the dark, silent chambers of absolute focus. How do we take this majestic, alchemical truth and forge it into an unshakable daily practice for your modern life? How do you transform your scattered, wandering intentions into a razor-sharp beam of concentrated creative power? The integration begins with the daily execution of the sealed chamber of the mind. Starting today, designate a specific window of time, even if it is only 20 minutes each morning, where you practice total reticence regarding your deepest ambitions. When you sit in the silence of your own room, do not let your mind wander across the opinions of others, past rejections, or future anxieties. Instead, gather the scattered fragments of your attention. Pull your energy back from the social media feeds, back from the dinner table conversations, back from the need for external approval. Visualize your mind as an optical lens, focusing every stray ray of desire into one intense, burning point of absolute certainty. Do not hope that your goal will happen. Feel the undeniable density of its reality pressing against your consciousness from the inside out. By treating your inner focus as a sacred, high-pressure asset that must never be vented prematurely, you become a master alchemist of your own destiny. The ambient noise of the world loses its grip on you, and your energy transforms from weak, scattered light into an unstoppable, cutting-edge force. Yet, as you master this internal concentration, a profound shift occurs in how you walk through your normal, mundane days. The practice ceases to be a mental exercise and becomes a total way of being. What happens when you stop waiting for the future to arrive and instead begin moving through the physical world as someone who already inhabits their ultimate realization? The pathway broadens and deepens as we cross the threshold into Chapter 8. Picture an ordinary Tuesday morning in a bustling metropolitan coffee shop. The air is thick with the rich aroma of roasted espresso beans, the metallic clatter of ceramic cups, and the low, frantic hum of dozens of people rushing to meet the demands of their day. Amidst this chaotic current of urban life sits a man alone at a corner table. He is dressed simply, his coffee grows cold beside him, and to all external appearances, he is just another face in the crowd, waiting for his life to begin. Yet, look closer at his posture, the quiet stillness of his hands, and the absolute serenity anchored deep within his eyes. While everyone else in the room is frantically striving, pushing, worrying, and begging the future to arrive, this man is moving through an entirely different dimension of time. He is not hoping for success. He is not visualizing a distant goal with the desperate longing of someone who believes it is out of reach. He is walking, breathing, and making split-second internal decisions from the unshakable psychological baseline of a man whose desire has already been completely fulfilled. Consider the profound, staggering paradox at the heart of conscious reality. You can never manifest what you want by striving for it. You can only manifest what you are already embodying in the sanctuary of your own consciousness. Humanity spends its collective existence trapped in the exhausting purgatory of someday. We live in the tense, jittery space of lack, constantly broadcasting our emptiness to the universe through our anxiety, our hustling, and our desperate need for proof. We wait for physical evidence before we allow ourselves to feel secure. The observer who wishes to master the architecture of reality must learn the supreme, a counterintuitive art of living from the end, stepping fully into the wish fulfilled before a single stone of it has been laid in the physical world. To dissect this master principle with the rigorous philosophical and psychological depth it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric laws through the uncompromising framework of recursive thinking. Why does the human mind stubbornly insist that physical evidence must precede internal conviction, and why does this chronological inversion guarantee failure? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question: what is the exact metaphysical and psychological mechanism by which the state of already having compels the physical universe to reorganize itself? On the material plane, human beings operate under a Newtonian illusion of cause and effect. First I work hard, then I get the result. First I see the proof, then I believe the truth. But on the higher plane of consciousness, the realm where Shinn, Neville Goddard, and ancient esoteric traditions converge, the law of creation is precisely inverted. First you inhabit the state of being, then the universe manufactures the reflection. How does the human nervous system process this inversion? When you desire something from a place of lack, hoping, wishing, or trying to convince yourself that it might happen someday, you are broadcasting a dominant frequency of absence. The universe, acting as a perfect, impartial mirror, reads your dominant frequency, which is lack, and faithfully reproduces more lack in your physical experience. You cannot attract what you want. You can only attract what you are. Why is living in the wish fulfilled the only escape from this loop? Because when you mentally step into the wish fulfilled, you cut off the oxygen supply of doubt. You stop treating your desire as a distant prize to be won through struggle, and start treating it as an established, mundane fact of your current existence. The psychological tension of striving dissolves instantly. Therefore, when we ask, how do we anchor this state into daily life? The answer demands a ruthless retraining of your emotional and mental baseline. You must realize that imagination is not a toy for idle daydreaming. It is the actual sensory organ of consciousness. Every time you make a decision, feel an emotion, or react to an external circumstance from the assumption that your desire is already a done deal, you are rewriting your neural architecture. You are signaling to the creative intelligence of the cosmos that the broadcast is complete. The physical world has no free will of its own. It is simply a delayed reflection, a shadow cast by the blazing sun of your internal state of being. To witness this principle of living from the end operating at the absolute peak of human manifestation, we must examine the legendary, unorthodox methods of one of history's greatest master builders and visionary pioneers, the legendary Renaissance architect and sculptor who approached every commission not as a problem to be solved, but as a reality already completed in the mind. When Michelangelo was tasked with carving the statue of David from a colossal block of flawed, discarded marble that had been ruined and abandoned by previous sculptors for decades, the artistic community of Florence watched with cynical amusement. The stone was cracked, narrow, and deemed structurally impossible to work with. Had Michelangelo approached that block of marble from the perspective of lack, had he stood before it asking, "How can I fix this? How can I carve something out of this mess if I work hard enough?" he would have succumbed to the collective doubt of his peers. Instead, Michelangelo operated from the absolute state of the wish fulfilled before he ever picked up a chisel. When asked how he intended to conquer the seemingly impossible stone, he famously replied that the statue of David was already fully alive, perfect, and complete inside the marble. His only job was simply to chip away everything that did not look like David. He did not carve with the frantic anxiety of a man trying to create something new. He chipped away with the calm, relaxed, absolute certainty of a man uncovering a treasure that was already there. He walked around his studio, made decisions, and swung his hammer not as a struggling artist hoping for greatness, but as the master who had already completed the masterpiece in the unseen realms of consciousness. The physical marble had no choice but to yield to his dominant state of being. When the dust finally settled, the discarded, cracked stone stood revealed as one of the greatest artistic achievements in human history. The physical world simply caught up to the reality that Michelangelo had already inhabited in silence. How do we take this majestic, transcendent truth and forge it into an unshakable, practical, daily practice for your modern life? How do you walk through a world of bills, traffic, and uncertainty while anchoring your consciousness firmly in the state of the wish fulfilled? The integration begins with the daily execution of the assumptive baseline. Starting today, cease all mental prayer that begs, pleads, or hopes for a future outcome. When you wake up in the morning, before you check your phone or let the noise of the world rush in, take 2 minutes to inhabit the feeling of your desire already realized. Do not visualize it as something happening next year. Experience it as the absolute present reality. Feel the emotional stability, the physical posture, and the quiet confidence of the person who already possesses what you are seeking. When challenges arise during your day, pause and ask yourself, how would the person who already has my dream respond to this obstacle right now? Make your decisions from that accomplished state. Let your inner knowing permeate your mundane actions with a terrifying, beautiful quietness. You are no longer striving for a goal, you are simply allowing your physical life to catch up to who you already are in the unseen realms of your soul. By mastering the art of living from the end, you strip the external world of its power to dictate your emotional reality. You become sovereign, steady, and magnetically aligned with the life you were born to live. Yet, as you maintain this unshakable internal fidelity to your vision, a profound and inevitable shift begins to occur in the outer world. The invisible forces you have been tending in silence reach a critical mass. What happens when your dominant state of consciousness becomes so dense, so absolute, and so immovable that reality itself breaks down and reorganizes to match it? The final, breathtaking threshold opens wide as we cross into Chapter 9. Picture an ancient, sprawling apple orchard standing beneath the heavy, indigo canopy of a late summer night. The trees are silent, motionless, and cloaked in complete darkness. For months, these trees have engaged in no public theater, no desperate negotiations with the elements, and no frantic announcements of their intent. They have simply stood their ground, absorbing water through unseen roots, drawing minerals from the dark earth, and holding a silent, unshakable blueprint coded deep within their DNA. Now, step forward into the blazing brilliance of an autumn morning. The first rays of golden sunlight wash over the orchard, and the transformation is staggering. Branches that appeared stark and barren just weeks before are now sagging beneath the immense, ruby weight of heavy, perfect fruit. There was no sudden struggle, no dramatic strain, and no loud press release sent out to the forest announcing the harvest. The fruit simply appeared because the internal law of the tree reached its inevitable maturity. Anyone walking down the path can see the tangible, undeniable evidence hanging right there in the physical world, requiring no explanation, no defense, and no justification. Consider the profound, unyielding paradox governing all true creation. When a state of consciousness is held in absolute, uncompromised silence until it reaches maturity, reality does not merely change, it reorganizes itself around you with terrifying, effortless inevitability. Humanity spends its existence trying to force the fruit onto the branches before the roots have even touched the soil. We wrestle with circumstances, argue with critics, and try to construct physical evidence of a reality we do not yet inhabit internally. The observer who wishes to master the architecture of reality must learn the supreme law of the harvest. Keep the seed private, and let the fruit be public. You do not need to convince the world of your reality when the fruit is heavy enough to speak for itself. To dissect this master principle with the rigorous philosophical and psychological depth it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric laws through the uncompromising framework of recursive thinking. Why does the physical world inevitably reorganize itself around a dominant state of consciousness, and how does this invisible mechanics bypass human struggle? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question. What is the exact metaphysical and neurological pathway by which an internal conviction translates into physical circumstances without external manipulation? On the material plane, human beings are conditioned to believe that physical matter is primary and consciousness is merely a secondary byproduct. But the higher laws of manifestation reveal the exact opposite. Consciousness is the only reality, and the physical world is merely a delayed, malleable reflection. How does the physical world register a dominant internal state? When you maintain an unshakable, silent fidelity to your vision, refusing to leak your energy through premature chatter, doubt, or the search for external validation, your dominant frequency becomes a fixed mathematical constant in your psyche. The human nervous system, acting as an advanced cybernetic filter, automatically begins to scan the environment for opportunities, resources, and alignments that match that internal baseline. Why is this reorganization irresistible to the outer world? Because physical reality possesses no independent will. It is a mirror. Just as a mirror cannot refuse to reflect the object placed before it, the material world cannot sustain a contradiction against a deeply rooted, uncompromised state of consciousness. If you truly inhabit the feeling of the wish fulfilled in silence, your tone of voice changes, your micro-expressions shift, your decisions become decisive, and your magnetic signature reorients. People who were once closed doors suddenly open. Resources that seemed impossible to access mysteriously materialize. Obstacles dissolve not through brute force, but through a series of uncanny, synchronized coincidences. Therefore, when we ask, how do we recognize when the reorganization is occurring? The answer demands absolute trust in the invisible mechanics. You stop looking for signs of struggle and start looking for signs of effortless alignment. You realize that your only responsibility during the entire journey was never to fight the world, but to tend your garden in the dark. Once the seed has matured in silence, the outer world has no mathematical choice left to make. It must bend, break, and rebuild itself around the anchor of your certainty. To witness this principle of the inevitable reorganization of reality operating at the absolute peak of human history, we must turn our gaze toward the legendary, solitary workspace of one of the greatest scientific minds of the 19th century, Michael Faraday, during his foundational breakthroughs in electromagnetic induction. For nearly a decade, Faraday worked in the damp, quiet basement laboratory of the Royal Institution in London. He was unheralded by the aristocratic scientific societies of his era, lacking formal mathematical training, and largely dismissed by the establishment as a mere laboratory assistant. Had Faraday operated like the modern seeker, had he run out into the streets of London every time he observed a minor magnetic deflection, shouting about his theories, seeking funding, and asking established physicists for permission to believe in his work, he would have been crushed by ridicule and bureaucratic obstruction. Instead, Faraday locked his laboratory doors. He maintained an absolute, monastic silence regarding the grand implications of his research. He did not debate his critics. He simply returned day after day to his coils, his copper wires, and his magnets, holding an unshakable inner vision of an invisible force that could convert mechanical motion into continuous electric current. For years, there was no public fruit. There was only the dark, repetitive labor of the seed underground. Yet, as his internal conviction solidified into an absolute, uncompromised knowing, the physical world began to shift around him. The very academic institutions that had ignored him began to experience bizarre, unexplainable anomalies in their own telegraph lines and equipment. The invisible field he was cultivating in secret was quietly rewriting the laws of global infrastructure before a single public lecture was ever delivered. When Faraday finally emerged from his basement sanctuary in 1831 to publish his experimental proofs, the scientific world did not merely receive a new theory, they were struck by an absolute paradigm shift. The entire industrial infrastructure of the modern world, electric motors, dynamos, power grids, instantly began to reorganize itself around the foundation Faraday had built in total silence. The fruit was so immense, so undeniable, and so overwhelmingly heavy that no critic on earth could argue with it. The silence had done its work, and reality had surrendered. How do we take this majestic, alchemical truth and forge it into an unshakable daily practice for your modern life? How do you walk through a world of resistance while trusting that your silent inner work is quietly restructuring your entire external destiny? The integration begins with the daily execution of the sovereign detachment. Starting today, release your anxious grip on how your manifestation is going to arrive. Stop scanning your environment for immediate proof. Stop checking for external validation, and stop trying to manipulate people or circumstances to force your desires into form. Instead, return entirely to the quiet sanctuary of your own mind. Know that the moment you planted your desire in silence, anchored it with your unwavering emotion, and protected it from the well-meaning saboteurs, the invisible wheels of the universe began to turn. The reorganization is already underway behind the scenes of your life. When you encounter an obstacle or a delay today, smile inwardly. Recognize that the outer world is simply lagging behind the speed of your consciousness, and it is frantically working to catch up to the state you have already claimed. Hold your ground, keep your peace. Let your focus remain dense, unshakable, and completely self-contained. By surrendering the need to force the harvest, You step into the ultimate mastery of the Creator. You become the quiet center of the wheel around which all reality spins. Yet, as this final transformation settles into the marrow of your bones, you realize that the journey of manifestation was never truly about getting things from the outside world. It was about discovering who you were required to become in the dark. What happens when the seeker, the seed, and the sovereign creator finally become one single, unbroken force of nature? The final, magnificent gates swing wide open as we cross the threshold into Chapter 10. Picture a solitary figure standing at the precipice of a high mountain ridge at the exact moment the night dissolves into dawn. Below, a vast and turbulent sea of mist obscures the valleys, the jagged cliffs, and the winding paths of the world left behind. The wind howls fiercely against the stone, carrying the cold whispers of doubt, the chaotic echoes of society, and the frantic demands of an unawakened populace clamoring for validation, applause, and proof. Yet, the figure does not flinch. There is no tremor in the hands, no frantic scanning of the horizon for approval, and no hesitation in the posture. The traveler has walked the lonely, unlit path of silence, has guarded the sacred seed through the darkest nights of the soul, and has watched the invisible machinery of reality bend to an uncompromised inner will. Consider the profound, transcendent paradox that crowns the entire journey of human evolution. The moment you completely surrender the desperate need for the world to understand, approve, or witness your vision, is the exact moment the world must bow unconditionally to your reality. Humanity spends its entire existence begging the external environment for a seat at the table, trading its divine sovereignty for a handful of social crumbs. We look outward for permission to become what we already are in the depths of our consciousness. The observer who has walked through these 10 chapters, who has learned to protect the fragile spark, to honor the invisible soil, to endure the sacred gestation, to lock the garden gates against well-being saboteurs, to starve the digital echo chamber, to concentrate the alchemical fire, to live from the end, and to trust the inevitable reorganization of reality now stands transformed. No longer a victim of circumstances, no longer a beggar for applause, the individual steps fully into the magnificent archetype of the sovereign creator. To dissect this final, supreme mastery with the rigorous philosophical and psychological depth it demands, we must apply Florence Scovel Shinn's esoteric laws through the uncompromising framework of recursive thinking. What is the actual metaphysical and psychological state of the sovereign creator, and why does this internal posture permanently sever the chains of lack and limitation? To answer this, we must ask the deeper question. What occurs within the foundational identity of an individual when they realize that consciousness is not merely a tool for getting things, but the very substance from which all things are projected? Most people approach manifestation as a beggar approaches a king, hoping for a handout, checking anxiously to see if the prayer was answered, and constantly measuring their worth by the physical items sitting in their bank account or reflected in their mirror. This transactional, beggar mindset is precisely what guarantees failure. It reinforces the primary illusion of separation. The belief that what you desire is out there, separate from you, waiting to be convinced or conquered. How does the sovereign creator permanently dissolve this illusion? By realizing that there is no out there. There is only the infinite, unfolding mirror of consciousness reflecting your dominant state of being back to you. When you master the art of silence, for you stop projecting your power onto external conditions, opinions, or timelines, you reclaim every scattered fragment of your attention from the dinner tables, the social media feeds, and the well-meaning voices of the crowd. Why is this reclamation the ultimate victory of the soul? Because when your identity is no longer anchored in physical feedback, you become truly unshakable. You do not need a crisis to test your faith, because your faith is no longer a reaction to circumstances, it is the foundational premise of your existence. You walk through the physical world with the quiet, terrifying authority of one who knows that the script has already been written in the silence of the mind, and the outer world is simply actors reading their lines on cue. Therefore, when we ask, how do we permanently inhabit this sovereign reality? The answer demands an absolute, irrevocable commitment to self-rulership. You realize that you are not here to seek permission from a sleeping world. You are here to awaken it through the uncompromised density of your own realized presence. The journey of manifestation comes to its breathtaking conclusion not when you get what you wanted, but when you realize that you were never separate from the power that created it. To witness this sovereign archetype operating at the absolute pinnacle of human history, we must look away from modern parables and turn our gaze toward the final, legendary years of master architect and designer Antoni Gaudí, whose monumental masterwork, with the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, stands as an immortal testament to sovereign creation. For over 40 years, Gaudí immersed himself entirely in the architectural design and construction of his cathedral. During the final decades of his life, he retreated from social pleasantries, cut off public interviews, and lived practically as a hermit inside his workshop on the construction site. He was mocked by contemporary critics who called his intricate, organic designs absurd, unscientific, and impossible to complete. The city council questioned his sanity, and financial backers frequently threatened to withdraw support as decades dragged on with the cathedral still unfinished. Had God been a conventional creator, he would have compromised his vision. He would have held public forums to defend his blueprints, modified his designs to appease the critics, or rushed to finish the work just to secure the applause of his contemporaries. Instead, God operated with absolute sovereign detachment. He knew that his vision was not dependent on the approval of Barcelona's municipal committees or the comfort of passing skeptics. He worked in silent, devoted communion with the natural geometries he saw written in the universe, trusting an invisible architectural intelligence that transcended his own lifetime. When asked by frustrated reporters why the construction was taking so many decades, God offered a reply that encapsulates the ultimate creed of the sovereign creator. My client is not in a hurry. God did not live to see the cathedral completed. He died after being struck by a tram, dressed in warm clothes, carrying no identification, initially mistaken for a pauper. Yet, the sovereign seed he planted in absolute silence, tended through decades of ridicule and isolation, possessed such immense, unshakable integrity that it outlived him by generations. Today, the soaring spires of the Sagrada Familia pierce the Spanish sky, drawing millions of awestruck witnesses from across the globe. The critics are long forgotten, buried in the dust of history, while God's silent, uncompromised vision stands as an eternal monument to what becomes possible when a creator refuses to trade their divine sovereignty for the cheap currency of public opinion. How do we take this majestic, crowning truth and weave it into the very fabric of your daily existence? How do you step out of the shadows of doubt, leave behind the frantic need for validation, and walk through your life as a sovereign creator? The integration begins with the ultimate, permanent vow of the inner sanctuary. Starting today, you stop waiting for the world to give you permission to claim your destiny. You stop explaining your dreams to those who cannot see them. You stop defending your choices against the well-meaning anxiety of allies. And you stop measuring your self-worth by the fleeting metrics of digital applause. Take a deep breath, settle your shoulders, and feel the immense, quiet power of your own unshared silence. Recognize that every ambition, every vision, and every grand possibility whispered into your heart by the infinite intelligence of the universe is already sacred, already protected, and already guaranteed to manifest if you simply have the courage to leave it alone in the dark to grow. When you walk into your day tomorrow, walk as the gardener who knows the harvest is coming, the alchemist who knows the gold is forming, and the sovereign who needs no crown because the kingdom is already established within. If this journey through Florence Scovel Shinn's timeless wisdom on silence, gestation, and sovereign creation has shifted something fundamental in your spirit, if you are ready to stop leaking your power to the crowd and start building your reality in the sacred dark, hit that like button right now to signal your commitment with this path. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where we continue to unpack the profound, hidden mechanics of consciousness for those who are truly serious about mastering their reality. Before you close this chapter, leave one final declaration in the comments below. I am the sovereign guardian of my vision. Let me know you are standing out there on this path of quiet mastery. There is a new horizon horizon waiting for you right over the next chapter, a deeper exploration into the energetic laws that govern how masters reshape the unseen. Click through, and let us continue this extraordinary journey together.